So let's get started. We're very excited tonight to welcome director John Sayles to the show. He is a tremendous filmmaker whose stellar and versatile works include films like 8 Men Out, The Return of the Secaucus 7, Baby It's You, The Brother from Another Planet, City of Hope, Passion Fish, and Silver City. Each of his films are elevated by his profoundly independent spirit and his refusal to compromise his vision to satisfy typical Hollywood conventions. Now in his 16th gorgeously realized vision titled Honeydripper, he tells the story of an aging juke joint owner in 1950s Alabama who has one last shot to save his beloved establishment and his fragile independence. Starring Danny Glover, Stacy Keach, and Charles Dutton, Honeydripper is a fantastically entertaining and rich experience, possessing the keen understanding of character and place that mark all of Mr. Sayles' astonishing work. It is a great honor to welcome to our program Mr. John Sayles. Mr. Sayles, are you with us?
I'm with you. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, you forgot to mention that I was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on stage.
That's right.
Yeah, I specialized for a long time in very large, very mentally challenged people. I played Chief Bromden and Lenny and Of Mice and Men and people like that.
And the Glass Menagerie, didn't you do a run?
Yeah, I was the son in the Glass Menagerie. Eventually, John Malkovich, who I just met about a month ago, was in the movie version of that theater production with Joanne Woodward.
And talk about the great American play. I mean, the Glass Menagerie is it for me.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah.
That's
and to get to do it
work.
with Joanne Woodward was just terrific.
So tell me about, since we've opened up the conversation here, I know that you act in some of your own films and some films of others. What does that give you? Is that important to you to do that?
Well, in my own films, it's sometimes a way not to have to pay for the airline ticket to bring another actor in, which saves us a lot of money. In Honeydripper, quite honestly, once again being large, Danny Glover's about 6'3", I'm 6'4", and my character's on screen very short period of time, and he needs to be a little bit intimidating. So it helps to be, there's not that many guys in American movies bigger than Danny, so that helps. And I played a lot of cop number one in movies.
Sure, yeah, but your movies are known for, among other things, their tremendous performances, and I would think it's a way to keep yourself empathetic to the experience of the actor too.
Yeah, I think it actually helps my writing even more than my directing. The thing that a good actor does when he gets a part is first think about how does this person see the world?
Right.
How when they walk into a room, how do they interpret things?
Right.
And that's what you do when you write characters. A lot of the drama is not just that they want different things, but they actually see a different world when they walk into that room. They're not even barely speaking the same language, and so it's one of the reasons the characters in my movie they sound different. They don't talk the same, they don't see the world the same, and that experience. And I'm usually a day player, so you also get the great experience of coming onto a movie set and people are auditioning for you without knowing it, because a day player, the minute you say your last line, you're like furniture, and nobody pays any more attention to you. You just try to get out of the way really quickly. So nobody's really paying that much attention to you, except let's hope this guy doesn't blow his lines and make us go into overtime. But you get to see technicians. You get to, I've worked with cinematographers, actors, all kinds of crew people who I observed first by being in somebody else's movie.
Sure. Let's talk about your writing for a little bit, because among other things, you're known for doing script work for the big studios. You get handed a lot of high-profile projects from the studios, and whether it's a complete rewrite or just an original draft that you work up for them. But is there a sense, because you don't know how much of your fingerprints will be on the final product, is there a sense of disengagement in that?
I wouldn't call it disengagement. I would say you're just kind of like a carpenter. You're not the architect, really. You're there to help them tell their story. And so, like a good carpenter, you might say, well, if you put the windows over there, you're not going to get any light in the morning. But if they say, but that's where we want the windows, you do your best job to put the windows there.
Sure.
So you can't get, I certainly work harder when I work for a studio or for somebody else trying to help them. I do more drafts. I have to think harder. I'm trying to make it something I would want to go see, but also that solves, their problems, the first of which being they can get a green light when they hand it upstairs. That's the first hurdle that they have to go back, past. But, you just can't get that emotionally involved because at some point they may just say, oh, we just got such and such an actor. That 45-year-old woman, she's now 20. I once sat in a meeting with John Frankenheimer, and I had about 3 or 4 days to write this script because there was about to be a screenwriters strike, which I'm on strike right now as we speak. And he said, oh, by the way, all the Chinese people in this story, make them Japanese, I can get Toshiro Mifune. And I said, well, the martial arts and the cultures are very different. He said, yeah, but I can get Toshiro Mifune. Now, if that was my picture and a studio said, we'll finance it if you make them all Japanese, I would have said, no, I'm sorry, they're Chinese. But, luckily I knew something about Japanese culture and martial arts, and I thought Toshiro Mifune is a great idea. This is before Jet Li was around. If it was today, I would have said, get Jet Li and we can keep him Chinese. But,
sure.
So I did a very, very quick, 4-day rewrite, and they ended up making the movie.
Do you ever come across a project, I think, what is it, Cold Case? That was one of the last ones that you worked on. Do you ever come across a good quality project like that you have an itch to maybe try out on your own? Does that ever happen?
Sometimes it does, but it's not like they're going to just give it to me and say, cast it how you want to and cut it how you want to. Generally when you're working for those companies, they're in such a high-stakes poker game that they're going to try to control every aspect of it so that they have a better chance of making a lot of money. So, the casting is not necessarily who's the best actor for this or even who's the best known actor for this. It's kind of, well, who could kind of be acceptable as that character who's really hot right now? Yeah, and that can change from the time that you write it. So at the last minute they may just say, oh, no, we want this actor, who may not be really who you think would be good at it, but they're really hot at that moment. So that usually tempers my temptation. Plus, they're not offering it to me anyway. So it's not a good idea to get your hopes up against something that is not going to happen.
Sure. You talk about casting, and I see in Honeydripper, I see Danny Glover and Charles Dutton together, and it just makes so much sense. Why hasn't this happened before? And in your own films, when you sit down to write them, do you write with particular actors in mind, or is that?
I try not to because you don't want to start out the process being disappointed and write something specifically for one person, and then they say no, and then they say, well, what happens to my character? I mean, I used to have this problem when I wrote, before I started directing. The studio would say, well, who do you see as this character? And I'd always say Spencer Tracy, and there just wasn't a Spencer Tracy around in those days, and there still isn't.
Did they ask you who Spencer Tracy was?
Not yet. In those days, no. They still knew.
Good.
Today they would, So what I do is I try to write it, and then I read it over a couple times. In the case of Honeydripper, the first time I read it, I said Danny Glover. He solves 99% of my problems if I could get Danny Glover to do this. And luckily, he said yes right away. And so the next round of asking people to come and work for scale, we were able to say, well, here's the movie, here's a good part, it's only 5 weeks of shooting, and Danny Glover's the lead. And that gets you past the agent, at least, and then the actor can say yes or no on their own. But, there's been movies where we couldn't even get past the agent.
On that first draft, like the first draft of Honeydripper, do you write with budgetary concerns in mind, or do you leave that kind of consideration for your rewrites?
I try not to think about that stuff until the last draft. And the last draft that I do is usually after we've gone to the location. We've shown it to some local people who know more about, how cotton gets picked or this or that or the other. So some of what goes into that last draft is local knowledge, as they say. But also, I've gotten to talk with the first AD and the production manager and Maggie Renzi, who produces it, and they can come back to me and say, okay, here's an eighth of a page, and it's also an eighth of our budget. Is this that important, this shot? This is what this is costing. And sometimes the answer is yes, it is worth it. Other times it's, well, does, this have to be at night? Night shooting is more expensive than day. Or, here's an actor who we have to pay for 6 days when he's not working because he says yup in another scene. Could you give that line to somebody else or have him just nod his head and then, or eliminate him from that scene or whatever? So, it's a very practical draft, that last draft. When I sit down to write a script, I do, though, have an idea of, okay, is this one that we could, make fairly easily, or I could possibly finance myself, or is this just one of those dream projects that, like 8 Men Out, took 11 years from the point where I wrote the first draft until we got to make it?
Yeah, what a journey. With Honeydripper, what were the first germs of the idea that struck you, and what did you wind up wanting to explore with that piece?
I think the real seed of it came from, my kind of long relationship with American music. I think like most people, you grow up, you turn on the radio, and there's the music, and you like it or you don't like it, but you just kind of accept that there it is. And then as I got older, I started hearing little things that weren't, top 40 rock and roll or little traces of things. And so in my case, Sam Cooke led me to the blues and gospel, along with Ray Charles. And that automatically leads you into the past. And I was born in 1950, and I started realizing, this music came from somewhere. There's a lot of ingredients that went into this thing that we call rock and roll, and it wasn't always called rock and roll. And then as I got even older, I started to realize, the electric guitar wasn't always around. What did that do? And so a lot of what Honeydripper deals with is one of those kind of big watershed transformations. It happened in Hollywood when the silent movies gave way to the talkies. Mm-hmm. And within 2 years, there were people who were just out of work, who couldn't make that transition, or in some cases, there were directors who just said, well, that's not an art. I do silent movies, And there were people who struggled with it. Charlie Chaplin, it took him quite a while to make his first talkie movie and really feel comfortable with it. So what happened in the music world when, I think the players can sense these things quicker than the audience can. They saw that solid body electric guitar with the amplifier that came with it for the first time. An awful lot of them must have said, everything's going to change. And I either get on this thing that's leaving the station or I get left behind.
Yeah. It's a beautiful movie, but music plays no small part in a lot of your films. And tell me how important music is in kind of fueling and inspiring your creative process.
It comes in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes very literally, because I often write these epics that, how am I ever going to get this thing financed when I'm not really working with a studio and it's so hard to raise money for everybody. There's a couple songs that I know are going to be in the movie, and I just put them on, and that just kind of gets you back into the fight. Hazel Dickens singing some of the songs that showed up later in Matewan. That took 7 years from the time that I wrote the first draft until we got to make it. And every once in a while, it just looked, we had literally, we were leaving on the airplane the next day to go to West Virginia to set up our office. And the people who said they were financing it called and said, they didn't approve our bank loan. We're not financing the movie. And we were just left flat. So there were a couple of years there where we didn't do anything. And, I just stick on Hazel singing a couple of these songs and say, this is worth doing. That one song so encapsulated what I wanted the feeling of the movie to be that it, kind of got our blood rushing again. Whenever I finish a script, I send it to Mason Daring, who's the composer I've worked with, on 15 of the 16 movies. Actually, the other, Baby It's You, we didn't have any composed music, and I worked with Joel Dorn, who recently passed, who helped us with the music clearances. And, we start talking about what's going to be the music voice of the movie. If I think I'm going to buy some songs, I send those back and forth. You don't always get the ones you want, so you have to have some alternates. We start talking about the menu of instruments, what the voice of the movie is going to be. In the case of Matewan, we listen to an awful lot of that kind of West Virginia, Kentucky, hill music, and we decided, okay, everything in this music except for the banjo. This just is not a banjo story, and also because the banjo, after Bonnie and Clyde, had gotten, kind of used for car commercials and, hillbilly comedies and stuff like that, and it just didn't fit the palette of that movie anymore.
Yeah.
So it's part of the tone of the movie that you have to start with right away. In the case of Honeydripper, we also had to, almost all the music you hear in the film that's performed is performed live in the film. I didn't want, just as, in Limbo, I didn't want Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio to have to lip sync to herself, so she's singing live. I wanted, Gary Clark Jr. and Eddie Shaw and all our great players, when they do a solo, they're really doing a solo. And every take of it is slightly different. So we pre-recorded the drum so that we'd always be on the same beat. But other than that, we just did a very careful, live recording of it so we could separate instruments later. And if you cut to the saxophone, we could raise the saxophone without raising any of the other instruments.
Yeah, and it does have that electric feel like live music does. And music really does create a instant world, a feeling of the environment that you're in. And that's what your movies are probably best known for, the sense of community and location. And I know that you shot this in Alabama, but where does that come from? I think I read where you hitchhiked across the U.S. when you were a teenager. Where does that awareness of
I think it really does come from being in different places and realizing part of what I'm getting here and part of what I'm feeling here and part of who these people are here is the place itself. And sometimes it's just a physical thing, Matewan is in the hills and hollers of West Virginia. There's no escape. Everywhere you turn, there's a big mountain face, right by you. Whereas in Lone Star, it's a widescreen movie, partly because there's this endless horizon, and it gives you just a different feeling. In Limbo, you're in Alaska, and you walk out your door and you realize nature is big and I am small, which doesn't happen in a lot of other places. Yeah. So, sometimes it's just a physical thing, but also a culture, and culture is a lot of who we are and a lot of, as I said before, how we see the world is about a time and a place. So, Harmony, Alabama in 1950, where Honeydripper is set, is different than the towns that we shot in to make the movie. We shot in Greenville, in Anniston, where the Army base is. We shot in a town called Georgiana, which is the town that you see in the movie that has just railroad tracks in the center of the town. That's where Hank Williams grew up. That place existed in a time and place and was like nowhere else. And the things that people assume, for instance, there's a little scene in the film where it's just a throwaway, but the people go to the back door of the hardware store and they pass the colored only entrance sign. Well, that was an assumption in most of those places. They usually didn't even have to have the sign because there weren't that many strangers who came into those little cotton towns. Everybody just knew you're on this side of the street or that side of the street. You're on this side of the tracks or that side of the tracks. And if you're African American, you don't go to the front entrance.
What really impressed me about this movie too, particularly Danny Glover's performance, is you feel so much history in that character, and yet it isn't explicitly expressed. But I understand that you write character bios for each of your actors prior to shooting.
Yeah, even if it's a small part, if it's if it's a one-page part, you might get a half-page bio. Danny got something that was 7 or 8 pages long, and a lot of it, and I included a CD, so he got the double set. A lot of it was his musical history. He's playing a boogie-woogie piano player, and you figure he's 50-something in 1950. He grew up with the music. His life is the first half of the 20th century in American music. So when he's a little boy, they're starting to play the blues. And the blues really didn't exist for very long before 1900. And then he was in New Orleans when Buddy Bolden and King Oliver were playing. And then, he was around during the Ma Rainey, kind of Bessie Smith thing, when that stuff started getting on the radio and they started recording people. And he was with swing bands. And now he's playing basically jump music and boogie woogie and old blues. And there's this new thing that shows up. And so a lot of what Danny needed to know is, what kind of piano player am I? Even to the point where, Danny doesn't actually play in the movie, but the piano player we got to play the stuff, we made sure that he knew, this guy has spent a lot of time in New Orleans, because there's a style of piano playing that comes out of New Orleans that's different than anywhere else in the world. So that's a lot of what you want your actor to know, and it's not always in the script itself. So you want to give them that stuff that they can, ammunition, because they're going to do their own work as well, but you want to get them started down the right track, and that's why I write those bios.
Yeah, I was wondering how much of it's a tremendous gift for an actor, I would think, but how much of a collaboration working up that backstory would be, because they have to have their own ideas.
What I try to head them off, because actors like nature abhor a vacuum, and what you find is if you don't give them something, they'll come with something of their own, and it may actually get them off the track. All of a sudden,
Sure.
It's, well, I can't do that because my uncle beat me with a wire coat hanger when I was 3 years old. And you say, what? But if you give them something, and that's the conversation you've had. One of the things is, this is a very ambitious movie, Honeydripper. We only had 5 weeks to shoot it. We can't really have those deep philosophical actor-director, who am I questions on the set. I got to have those beforehand, and we do it in correspondence and over the phone, and then really on the set, it's about the blocking of the scene, and then really what you want to do is turn those good actors loose on each other. And so the collaboration, to a certain extent, has already happened by the time we get to the set. And then the next part of the collaboration is the actors with each other. We have so many good actors in this. There's a great little scene between Lisa Gay Hamilton and Mary Steenburgen. And, it's like a small play. And we had 1 day to shoot it. And they just, Mary, we only had her for 1 day, and she just hooked into this other actor. And they're supposed to be people who've known each other for years and years and years and years, and have this strange employer-employee, black and white 1950 Alabama relationship. And they just knocked me out. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't do any directing, but a lot of my directing was, you're going in this direction, push it in this way a little bit more, or hold back a little bit more before you show that, or try to hide this from her, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it is just the louder, softer, move a little to your right, move a little to your left stuff that...
Well, when you have great actors like that, I would think that a big discipline would be knowing when not to direct.
Exactly. I mean, truly the first couple takes, and we don't do that many takes, is just to see what they're going to do.
Yeah.
What are they going to bring? Because, quite honestly, I try to just cast good actors to do something I have never seen them do before. Maybe I've seen a hint of it, but never on that scale or that size of a part. Or, David Strathairn, who I've worked with, 6 or 7 times. It's just, David, do something cool, And each time it's a very different character, and it's always just fun to see who is he this time.
And you
what are they going to throw at us? Yeah.
Yeah. Why hasn't it gotten easier for you to fund these movies? You obviously attract a tremendous caliber of actor.
Well, that's the one thing that has gotten easier, and it's the biggest compliment we get is the actors who say yes to basically working for scale and, working hard and being in a movie that's not going to get, $20 to $30 million of national advertising thrown behind it. What's gotten harder, I think, is just that unless your movies, no matter who you are, whether you're working in a studio system or outside of it, if your last couple movies didn't go platinum, the people who put money into movies are not they just don't see the upside. Yeah. So, you're just not going to be on the hot list for that long, and we never quite made it. Also, and this is once again a very mixed thing, there's a lot more competition than there used to be.
Yeah.
When we started, our first movie we made it in '78, and it opened in 1980. There were maybe 12 to 15 independent movies made, and the heads of the 3 or 4 companies that distributed those movies, the heads of the company would look at anything with sprocket holes. Now, there's 15 people under the heads of those maybe 20 companies that do that, and it's got to go up through a chain of people before that head of the company even says yes and watches 10 minutes of it on his DVD while he's making phone calls. And the Sundance Film Festival is getting 5,000 or 6,000 features submitted every year, and some of those people 3 years later make a second film. And so the amount of competition. There's still only 52 weeks in the year. There's still X number of theaters that show non-Hollywood movies. So a non-Hollywood screen could show a different movie every week and have a pretty good movie, a watchable movie.
Yeah.
And you just can't make money back to make your next film if it only plays for 1 week. So that's the difficulty that we're in, and we're distributing Honeydripper partly to find a way around that. And I think that the movie business, certainly the independent movie business, has got to start doing what the music business did, which is to find other avenues of attack, because the old system isn't working for people.
Yeah. So, but you did open this past weekend in New York and LA, was it? And,
yeah.
And what's the plan from here?
Well, we're going to try to hold those theaters in those big cities, and then pretty much starting Martin Luther King Day and the very end of January, we're going to start opening other cities. We'll never have that many prints at first, but we'll go to Atlanta, do an opening there. We're going to, we're going to be in the next 2 months in 17 different cities.
Wow.
Doing it the kind of legwork way, getting a little buzz going personally. We're doing a lot more stuff on the web than we used to, which is nice because it's direct and it doesn't cost as much as buying an ad, and because quite honestly, you can what they used to call narrowcast a lot more. So we've been doing a lot more interviews with music magazines, with modern guitar magazine, all that, because of the music component of it. And just let's make every shot count instead of just spraying the whole neighborhood with a machine gun.